Jerome wiped the sweat from his forehead as he clocked out from his third double shift this week. The warehouse job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough, and he had a goal that kept him going through those long 16-hour days. Every dollar he earned was one step closer to his dream. For 2 years, Jerome had been saving for something special. Not a fancy car or expensive clothes, but a boat. He'd grown up near the water, spending summers with his grandfather who taught him everything about sailing and fishing. Those were some of the happiest memories of his childhood, and now at 32 he finally had enough money to buy his own piece of that happiness. The boat he'd found was perfect. A beautiful 28-foot cabin cruiser with gleaming white paint and enough space for weekend trips. The previous owner had taken excellent care of it, and Jerome fell in love the moment he stepped aboard. He named it New Horizons because that's exactly what it represented for him. Moving to Riverside Marina had been a big step up. The community was fancy, with perfectly manicured lawns and expensive homes overlooking the water. Jerome was one of only a few black residents in the area, but he'd worked hard to afford his spot there. His small townhouse might not have been the biggest in the neighborhood, but it was his, and so was his boat slip. The Homeowners Association ran everything in Riverside Marina with strict rules and high standards. Jerome didn't mind following the regulations. He kept his boat spotless, paid his fees on time, and stayed out of the neighborhood politics. All he wanted was to enjoy his weekends on the water in peace. 3 months after buying the boat, Jerome had settled into a comfortable routine. Weekdays were for work and weekends were for sailing. He'd invite friends occasionally, but mostly he enjoyed the quiet solitude of being on the water. There was something therapeutic about the gentle rocking of the boat and the sound of waves against the hull. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening when Jerome's phone rang. His sister's voice was shaky, and he could tell she'd been crying. Their mother had collapsed at home and was now in the hospital in Atlanta. The doctors weren't sure what was wrong, but they needed to run more tests. She was asking for her children. Jerome didn't hesitate. He booked the first flight he could find and started packing immediately. His boss at the warehouse wasn't happy about the sudden time-off request, but family came first. Jerome explained the situation and promised to return as soon as possible, hoping it would only be a few days. Before leaving for the airport, Jerome made sure his boat was properly secured. He double-checked all the lines, covered the electronics, and locked everything up tight. He'd installed a good security system, after hearing about some vandalism issues in the neighborhood. The cameras were hidden but provided full coverage of the boat, and the GPS tracking system would alert him if anyone moved it without permission. He also stopped by the marina office to inform them he'd be away for about a week. The dock manager, an older man named Peterson, noted it in his records and promised to keep an eye on things. Jerome felt confident leaving his boat in Peterson's care. The man had been working at the marina for over 20 years and knew every boat owner personally. The flight to Atlanta felt endless. Jerome stared out the window, thinking about his mother and praying she'd be okay. She'd raised 3 children on her own after their father died, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table and clothes on their backs. Now it was his turn to take care of her. At the hospital, Jerome found his mother weak but conscious. The doctors suspected it might be her heart, but they needed more time to figure out the exact problem. His sister had been staying at the hospital around the clock, and Jerome insisted she go home to rest while he took over. Days blended together in the sterile hospital environment. Jerome slept in uncomfortable chairs, ate cafeteria food, and held his mother's hand while machines beeped around them. The doctors remained cautiously optimistic, but they wanted to keep her for observation and additional tests. Back in Riverside Marina, things were about to get complicated. The Homeowners Association was in full planning mode for their biggest event of the year. The annual Founders' Day celebration was their chance to show off to potential new residents and impress local politicians who might support their various community projects. Patricia Whitmore had been the HOA president for 3 years running. She was the type of woman who thrived on being in charge, organizing events, and making sure everything in the community met her high standards. This year's Founders' Day was especially important because several wealthy investors were expected to attend, and Patricia wanted everything to be perfect. The centerpiece of the celebration was supposed to be a sunset cruise for the VIP guests. Patricia had arranged to rent a luxury yacht for the evening, complete with catering and entertainment. It would be the perfect way to show off the marina and convince the investors that Riverside was the kind of upscale community they wanted to be part of. But 3 days before the event, disaster struck. The yacht rental company called with terrible news. Their boat had suffered engine problems and wouldn't be available for the celebration. They offered a smaller replacement vessel, but it wouldn't accommodate all the VIP guests Patricia had invited. Patricia hung up the phone in her perfectly decorated home office and felt panic setting in. She'd sent out invitations weeks ago. The catering was ordered, the photographer was booked, and she'd promised everyone an unforgettable evening on the water. How could she face the other board members and tell them the whole thing was ruined? That's when she walked down to the marina to clear her head and think of a solution. The sun was setting, casting beautiful golden light across the water and the boats bobbing gently in their slips. As she walked along the dock, she noticed one boat that seemed perfect for her needs. New Horizons was exactly the right size, beautifully maintained, and clearly expensive enough to impress her guests. Patricia assumed it belonged to one of the wealthier residents who would surely be happy to help the community in a time of need. After all, everyone in Riverside Marina benefited from successful HOA events that brought positive attention to the neighborhood. She made a mental note to contact the boat owner first thing in the morning. Surely they'd understand the importance of the situation and be willing to lend their boat for such a worthy cause. Patricia went home that night feeling much better about the whole situation, confident that she'd found the perfect solution to her problem. She had no idea that the boat's owner was sitting in a hospital room hundreds of miles away, worried sick about his mother and completely unaware that his peaceful marina community was about to turn his life upside down. Patricia woke up the next morning with renewed energy and a clear plan. She had her coffee while looking out at the marina, spotting the boat that would save her Founders Day celebration. All she needed to do was contact the owner and explain the situation. Surely any reasonable person would understand the importance of helping the community. The problem was, Patricia didn't actually know who owned New Horizons. She'd seen it around the marina for a few months but had never paid attention to who was using it. In her mind, it had to belong to one of the established families in the neighborhood. The boat was too nice and expensive for anyone else to afford. Her first stop was the marina office, where she found Peterson sorting through paperwork behind the front desk. Patricia put on her most charming smile and explained that she needed to contact the owner of the boat in slip 47 for an important community matter. Peterson looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore, but I can't give out personal information about boat owners." "That's our policy." Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "This is for the HOA, Peterson. It's official community business. I just need to ask them about borrowing their boat for our Founders Day celebration. I understand, but I still can't share private information. You'll need to contact them directly or go through proper channels." Patricia felt her frustration building. She was used to getting her way, especially when it came to community matters. "What proper channels?" "I'm the HOA president. This is important." Peterson shifted nervously. He'd worked at the marina long enough to know that crossing the HOA could make his job difficult, but he also took his responsibilities seriously. "Maybe you could post a notice on the community board asking the owner to contact you?" That would take too long, and Patricia knew it. The celebration was only 2 days away. She needed a solution now, not after playing phone tag with some boat owner who might not even check the community board regularly. After leaving the marina office empty-handed, Patricia called an emergency meeting with the other HOA board members. She gathered them in her living room that afternoon, explaining the yacht rental disaster and her proposed solution. "There's a perfect boat right here in our own marina," she told them. "It's exactly what we need for the VIP cruise. We just need to contact the owner and work out the details." Board member Robert Chen looked skeptical. "Do we know who owns it?" "What if they say no?" "Why would they say no?" Patricia responded. "This is for the good of the entire community. Property values, reputation, all of that benefits everyone who lives here." Another board member, Helen Rodriguez, chimed in. "What if we can't reach them in TTO?" The celebration is tomorrow night." Patricia had been thinking about this exact problem. "Look, we all pay HOA fees. Those fees go toward maintaining common areas and supporting community events. In a way, we all have a stake in everything here, including helping each other out in emergencies." The room fell quiet as the board members considered this logic. It wasn't entirely wrong, but it wasn't entirely right either. HOA fees didn't give them ownership rights over private property, but Patricia had a way of making her arguments sound reasonable. "What if we just borrow it for one evening?" she continued. "We'll be very careful. We'll clean it thoroughly afterward, and we'll make sure nothing gets damaged. It's just a few hours on the water with some of the most important people in the city." Robert still looked uncomfortable. "Shouldn't we at least try to contact the owner first?" "Of course," Patricia agreed. "But if we can't reach them by tomorrow afternoon, we might have to make an executive decision for the good of the community." The meeting ended with a reluctant agreement to try finding the boat owner through various channels. Patricia promised to exhaust all options before considering any other course of action. But privately, Patricia had already made up her mind. She spent the rest of the evening researching HOA bylaws and community agreements, looking for any language that might justify emergency use of private property for community benefit. She found a few vague clauses about community cooperation and shared responsibility, but nothing that explicitly gave the HOA permission to borrow someone's boat. The next morning, with only one day left before the celebration, Patricia made a decision that would change everything. She returned to the marina office with a different approach. "Peterson," she said with authority, "I need access to slip 47 for an official HOA inspection." Peterson looked confused. "An inspection? What kind of inspection?" Patricia had prepared for this question. "We've had reports of potential safety violations. As HOA president, I have the authority to investigate any issues that might affect community safety or property values." This was a complete fabrication, but Patricia delivered it with such confidence that Peterson hesitated. He knew the HOA had significant power in the community, and he didn't want to be responsible for interfering with official business. "I don't know," Peterson said slowly. "I've never had a request like this before." Patricia pressed her advantage. "Check the community bylaws if you need to. Section 12 clearly states that the HOA has inspection rights for safety and maintenance purposes. I just need to take a quick look at the boat to document any issues." There was no Section 12 that said anything of the sort, but Peterson didn't have the bylaws memorized. He looked through his files while Patricia waited, projecting an air of patient authority. Finally, Peterson found what he thought might be the relevant section. It was vaguely worded language about community standards and maintenance requirements. It didn't explicitly mention boat inspections, but it wasn't clear enough to definitively say Patricia didn't have the right to inspect. "I guess if it's official HOA business," Peterson said reluctantly, reaching for the master keys. "But you'll need to sign a form taking responsibility for any issues." Patricia eagerly signed whatever paperwork Peterson put in front of her. A few minutes later, she had the keys to slip 47 and access to New Horizons. Walking down the dock toward the boat, Patricia felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She was crossing a line and she knew it, but she convinced herself it was for a good cause. The celebration would bring positive attention to the marina, property values would benefit, and everyone would ultimately be grateful for her decisive leadership. The boat was even more beautiful up close. Patricia could tell it was well-maintained and obviously cared for by someone who took pride in their investment. She felt a moment of guilt about what she was planning, but pushed it aside. This was bigger than one person's boat. This was about the entire community's reputation and success. That afternoon, Patricia returned with several volunteers from the decorating committee. They spent hours preparing New Horizons for the VIP cruise, hanging HOA banners, setting up the catering stations, and arranging flowers throughout the cabin. The boat looked absolutely perfect for an elegant evening celebration. As the sun began to set on Founder's Day, Patricia stood on the deck of the borrowed boat, greeting her distinguished guests. Local politicians, wealthy investors, and prominent business leaders stepped aboard, complimenting the beautiful vessel and the stunning marina setting. "What a gorgeous boat," commented City Councilman Williams as he accepted a glass of champagne. "Is this yours, Patricia?" Patricia smiled mysteriously. "Let's just say it belongs to the community tonight." Nobody questioned this response. The guests were too busy enjoying the elegant atmosphere and beautiful sunset views as the boat pulled away from the dock. Patricia felt triumphant as she watched her celebration unfold exactly as she'd envisioned. She had no idea that several hundred miles away, A man sitting in a hospital room had just received an automated alert on his phone. The GPS tracking system on his boat had detected unauthorized movement, and the security cameras were beginning to record everything that was happening aboard New Horizons, the evening that Patricia thought would cement her reputation as a successful community leader was about to become the beginning of her downfall. The evening cruise was going perfectly from Patricia's perspective. The sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as New Horizons glided smoothly through the calm waters of the bay. Her 15 distinguished guests were mingling on the deck, sipping champagne and praising both the beautiful boat and the elegant organization of the event. Patricia felt like she was on top of the world. City Councilman Williams was discussing potential municipal grants for marina improvements. 3 prominent business leaders were talking about possibly purchasing property in Riverside. The evening was exceeding all her expectations for promoting the community. "Patricia, you've really outdone yourself this year," said Helen Rodriguez, raising her glass in a toast. "This boat is absolutely perfect for events like this." Patricia beamed with pride, accepting compliments as if she'd personally chosen and prepared the vessel. In her mind, she'd solved an impossible problem and saved the most important event on the HOA calendar. She was already imagining the grateful emails she'd receive from board members and the positive coverage in the local newspaper. About an hour into the cruise, as Patricia was giving a speech about community values and future development plans, one of the guests pointed toward the horizon. "Looks like we've got company," he said, gesturing toward a vessel approaching with flashing lights. Patricia looked up from her notes to see a Coast Guard patrol boat heading directly toward them. Her stomach dropped slightly, but she told herself there was probably a routine explanation. Maybe they were just checking on evening traffic or conducting regular safety patrols. The Coast Guard vessel pulled alongside New Horizons, and an officer called out through a megaphone. "Good evening. This is the U.S. Coast Guard. We need to conduct a routine safety inspection. Please reduce speed and prepare for boarding." Patricia's confident smile began to waver, but she maintained her composure. Routine inspections happened sometimes, and she was sure everything would be fine. The boat was in perfect condition, and they had all the required safety equipment. This would just be a minor inconvenience. Officer Rodriguez, a 10-year veteran of the Coast Guard, stepped aboard with his partner. He was conducting what should have been a standard evening patrol when their database flagged an inconsistency with this particular vessel. The boat's current location and movement didn't match the registered owner information in their system. "Good evening, folks," Officer Rodriguez said politely. "I'm going to need to see the boat registration and the operator's license, please." Patricia felt her throat tighten, but she maintained her authority. "Of course, officer. I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Riverside Marina Homeowners Association. This is an official community event." Officer Rodriguez nodded patiently. "I understand, ma'am. But I still need to see the boat's registration documents and identification from whoever is operating the vessel." Patricia's mind raced. She'd been so focused on solving her event crisis that she hadn't thought about the legal requirements of actually operating someone else's boat. "The registration should be somewhere in the cabin," she said, trying to sound confident. "Let me just find it for you." As Patricia disappeared into the cabin to search for documents she knew she wouldn't find, the distinguished guests began to look uncomfortable. Councilman Williams quietly asked his aide about their schedule for the rest of the evening. The business leaders stopped their conversations about property investments and started checking their phones. Officer Rodriguez followed Patricia into the cabin. "Ma'am, the registration is usually kept in a specific location. Do you know where the owner typically stores it?" Patricia opened several compartments and drawers, growing more desperate with each empty search. "I'm sure it's here somewhere," she said, her voice slightly higher than usual. "Perhaps the owner moved it to a different location." "You're not the owner of this vessel?" Officer Rodriguez asked, his tone becoming more serious. "Well, no, not technically," Patricia admitted, still searching frantically. "But I have full authority from the HOA to use community resources for official events." Officer Rodriguez and his partner exchanged glances. This was not sounding like a routine situation anymore. "Ma'am, could you step back on deck, please? I need to ask you some questions." Back on deck, with all the guests watching nervously, Officer Rodriguez began a more detailed inquiry. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you tell me who owns this boat?" Patricia's confident facade was cracking under the pressure. The owner is a member of our marina community. This is an official HOA event for very important guests. I need the owner's name and contact information, the officer said firmly. Patricia realized she was in serious trouble. I don't have that information with me right now, but I can assure you this is a legitimate community function. Officer Rodriguez's partner was running the boat's registration numbers through their database. Within minutes, he had the information they needed. The boat was registered to Jerome Washington, with an address in the Riverside Marina community. More importantly, their system showed no record of this boat being reported as available for rental or community use. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said, his tone now completely professional, "according to our records, this vessel is registered to someone named Jerome Washington. Are you related to Mr. Washington, or do you have written permission to operate his boat?" Patricia felt the blood drain from her face. She'd been operating under the assumption that the boat belonged to someone she could easily contact and convince. Hearing the actual owner's name made the reality of her situation crystal clear. We tried to contact the owner," she stammered. "This is an emergency situation for our community event." "Emergency situations don't override boat registration laws," Officer Rodriguez explained. "Operating someone else's vessel without permission is a serious matter. I'm going to need you to contact Mr. Washington immediately." The distinguished guests were no longer pretending to enjoy the evening. Several were quietly making phone calls, probably to their drivers or assistants. The elegant atmosphere Patricia had worked so hard to create was evaporating with each passing minute. "Officer, surely we can work this out," Patricia pleaded. "These are very important people, and this is a significant community event. Can't we just finish the cruise and sort out the paperwork later?" Officer Rodriguez shook his head. "Ma'am, I need you to attempt to contact the boat owner right now. If you can't reach him and verify permission, we're going to have to escort this vessel back to shore." Patricia pulled out her phone with shaking hands, realizing she had no way to contact Jerome Washington. She didn't have his phone number, and she wasn't even sure if he was in town. The marina office was closed for the evening, and Peterson wasn't answering his personal phone. As she stood on the deck, surrounded by increasingly uncomfortable VIP guests and facing serious questions from law enforcement, Patricia finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. What had seemed like a creative solution to a community problem was actually theft. She had taken someone's property without permission and was now operating it illegally with a boat full of witnesses. The golden sunset, that had looked so beautiful an hour earlier, now felt like a spotlight exposing her poor judgment. The gentle rocking of the boat, which had seemed so elegant and peaceful, now made her feel sick to her stomach. Officer Rodriguez was patient but firm. "Mrs. Whitmore, if you can't produce permission from the owner or contact him to verify consent, I'm required to treat this as unauthorized use of the vessel. We'll need to escort you back to the marina immediately." Patricia looked around at her guests, seeing disappointment and embarrassment in their faces. Councilman Williams was already making apologies to leave early. The business leaders were discussing their transportation arrangements. Her perfect evening was turning into a public humiliation, but the worst part was yet to come. Hundreds of miles away in a hospital room in Atlanta, Jerome Washington had just received an automated alert on his phone. His boat's GPS system was showing movement, and his security cameras were sending him live footage of strangers aboard his beloved New Horizons. As Patricia desperately tried to figure out how to contact the boat's owner, that owner was already calling the Coast Guard to report his vessel as stolen. Jerome sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, exhausted from another long day at his mother's bedside. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her recovery, but she still needed several more days of observation. He was scrolling through his phone, trying to distract himself from the beeping machines and antiseptic smell, when the first alert appeared on his screen. Unauthorized movement detected. New Horizons. Jerome stared at the notification for a moment, thinking it might be a system glitch. His boat was securely docked in his slip back in Riverside Marina, hundreds of miles away. There was no reason for any movement alerts. Then a second notification appeared. Security camera activated. Motion detected on deck. Jerome's heart began to race. Someone was on his boat. With shaking fingers, he opened the security app on his phone. The live camera feed showed people he'd never seen before walking around on his deck, holding drinks and laughing. A woman in an expensive dress was directing others as they hung decorations from his railings. Jerome watched in disbelief as strangers treated his most prized possession like their personal party venue. "This can't be real," he whispered to himself, but the GPS tracking confirmed his worst fears. His boat was moving away from the dock, heading out into the bay with a boat full of unauthorized passengers. Jerome's first instinct was to call Peterson at the marina, but it went straight to voicemail. The marina office was closed, and Peterson didn't typically work evenings. His second call was to the non-emergency police line, but they told him maritime issues needed to be handled by the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard dispatcher took his call seriously. Jerome provided his boat registration numbers, GPS coordinates from his tracking system, and a clear statement that he had not given anyone permission to use his vessel. The dispatcher assured him that patrol boats in the area would investigate immediately. "Sir, can you provide any additional information about who might have taken your boat?" the dispatcher asked. Jerome thought about it. He'd been away for several days and only the marina office knew about his absence. "I left word with the dock manager that I'd be away for about a week. Other than that, nobody should have had access. We'll have our officers investigate and contact you as soon as they locate the vessel," the dispatcher promised. Jerome hung up and immediately began reviewing the security footage from earlier in the day. What he saw made his blood boil. The cameras had captured everything: a woman in professional clothes using keys to access his boat, groups of people boarding with decorations and catering supplies, and worst of all, the same woman giving what appeared to be a tour to elegantly dressed passengers as if she owned the place. He screenshot the clearest images and saved the video files. Whatever was happening, he now had evidence of exactly who was responsible. Back on the water, Patricia was growing more desperate by the minute. Officer Rodriguez had been patient, but his partner was already radioing their headquarters about the situation. The distinguished guests were no longer trying to hide their discomfort, and several were openly discussing how to get back to shore as quickly as possible. "Mrs. Whitmore," Officer Rodriguez said, "I'm going to need you to provide contact information for Mr. Washington within the next 5 minutes, or we'll have to treat this as a theft situation." Patricia's phone buzzed with calls from other HOA board members who had heard about Coast Guard activity in the bay. She ignored them, frantically trying to think of any way to contact the boat owner or explain her way out of this nightmare. That's when Officer Rodriguez's radio crackled to life. "Unit 7, this is dispatch. We've received a report from the registered owner of that vessel. He's reporting it as stolen." The officer's expression became much more serious. "Dispatch, can you confirm? The owner is reporting the vessel is stolen?" "Affirmative. Owner is Jerome Washington, currently in Atlanta. He states he gave no permission for anyone to use his boat and is watching unauthorized persons aboard via his security system." Patricia felt like the deck was dropping out from under her feet. Not only was the boat owner aware of what was happening, but he was actively reporting it as theft. Her community event had just become a criminal matter. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said, his tone now completely official, "you're operating a vessel that has been reported stolen by its owner. I need everyone to remain calm while we sort this out, but we're returning to shore immediately." The reaction from the VIP guests was immediate and dramatic. Councilman Williams demanded to speak with his attorney. The business leaders were making urgent phone calls about transportation and distanced themselves from the situation. Helen Rodriguez was frantically texting other HOA board members about emergency damage control. As the Coast Guard escorted New Horizons back toward Riverside Marina, Patricia tried one last desperate approach. "Officer, surely there's been a misunderstanding. I'm the HOA president. We have community agreements about shared resources." "Ma'am, HOA agreements don't override federal maritime law or property ownership rights," Officer Rodriguez explained firmly. "Taking someone's boat without permission is theft, regardless of your position in the community." Meanwhile, Jerome was busy documenting everything he could from his hospital room. He'd created a detailed timeline using his security footage, showing exactly when the unauthorized access began and who was involved. He'd also started posting some of the evidence on his social media accounts, asking if anyone knew who these people were. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Friends and followers began sharing the posts, expressing outrage at the situation. Someone who recognized the HOA president from community meetings tagged her name, and within an hour, the story was spreading throughout local social media groups. "Can you believe this?" Jerome posted along with a clear image of Patricia directing the decoration of his boat. "I'm in Atlanta taking care of my sick mother, and the HOA president decides to steal my boat for her party." The post was shared dozens of times within the first hour. Local news reporters who monitored social media for stories began reaching out to Jerome for interviews. Marina residents who recognized their HOA president in the images started calling and texting each other with shocked reactions. Back at Riverside Marina, a small crowd had gathered at the docks as word spread about the Coast Guard escort. News crews, tipped off by social media activity, were setting up cameras to capture the boat's return. Patricia's perfect evening was about to become a very public humiliation. Jerome's phone was now buzzing constantly with calls from reporters, friends, and even strangers who'd seen his social media posts. The story was taking on a life of its own as people shared their own experiences with overzealous HOA boards and property rights violations. "Mr. Washington," a reporter from the local TV station said when Jerome answered, "We've seen your social media posts about the boat theft. Would you be willing to do a phone interview about what happened?" Jerome agreed, partly because he was angry and partly because he wanted people to understand that this wasn't just about a boat. This was about respect, property rights, and the dangerous sense of entitlement that some people felt toward other people's belongings. During the interview, Jerome spoke calmly but passionately about working double shifts to afford his dream boat, the violation he felt watching strangers treat his property like their own, and his disappointment that someone in a leadership position would think this behavior was acceptable. "I trusted this community when I moved here," Jerome said. "I followed all the rules, paid my fees, and tried to be a good neighbor. But apparently, some people think being HOA president gives them the right to take whatever they want." As New Horizons approached the marina with its Coast Guard escort, Patricia could see the news crews and gathering crowd. Her elegant evening had become a public relations disaster that would follow her for years to come. The VIP guests who were supposed to be impressed with the community were now witnesses to a criminal investigation. Officer Rodriguez prepared his paperwork as they docked. Patricia would be facing serious charges, and the evening that was supposed to cement her reputation as an effective leader had instead exposed her as someone who believed community service justified criminal behavior. The worst part was knowing that, somewhere in Atlanta, the real owner of this beautiful boat was watching it all unfold in real time, surrounded by the stress of his mother's illness and the violation of his trust. Patricia's decision to solve her party problem had created a much bigger problem for everyone involved. The scene at Riverside Marina was unlike anything the community had ever witnessed. News vans lined the usually quiet waterfront street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the evening sky. Residents emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion and the flashing lights of the Coast Guard escort bringing New Horizons back to shore. Patricia stood on the deck, watching her nightmare unfold in real time. The elegant guests who had been praising her organizational skills just hours earlier were now avoiding eye contact and making urgent phone calls to their attorneys and public relations teams. The sight of news cameras waiting on the dock made several of them attempt to hide their faces behind their hands or evening bags. Officer Rodriguez guided the boat into its slip with professional efficiency, while his partner coordinated with local law enforcement officers who had arrived to take over the investigation. What had started as a routine maritime patrol had become a theft case with multiple witnesses and extensive video evidence. "Mrs. Whitmore," Officer Rodriguez said as they tied off the boat, "you'll need to come with Officer Chen here to answer some questions about tonight's activities." Patricia's last shred of dignity evaporated as she was escorted off the boat in full view of the news cameras. The community leaders she'd worked so hard to impress watched in silence as their evening host became the subject of a criminal investigation. Jerome, still in his hospital room in Atlanta, was watching the live news coverage on his phone while his mother slept peacefully beside him. Seeing his boat safely returned to the dock brought him relief, but the violation he felt ran much deeper than the simple theft of property. "This is Rebecca Martinez reporting from Riverside Marina," the local news anchor was saying, "where Coast Guard officials have returned a stolen boat to its dock. The boat's owner, Jerome Washington, is currently in Atlanta caring for his hospitalized mother and watched the entire incident unfold through his boat's security system." The story was spreading beyond local news. Regional networks picked up the footage of well-dressed community leaders being questioned by police after their elegant evening cruise was revealed to be aboard a stolen vessel. Social media exploded with commentary about entitled HOA boards and the importance of property rights. By the next morning, Patricia was facing multiple criminal charges: unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, criminal trespass, filing false reports with the Marina office, and conspiracy charges related to planning the theft. The district attorney's office was taking the case seriously, partly because of the public attention, and partly because the evidence was overwhelming. The HOA board called an emergency meeting for that evening. Word had already leaked about Patricia's arrest, and angry residents packed the community center to capacity. Many had seen the news coverage and social media posts, and they wanted answers about how their elected representative could have made such catastrophic decisions. Board member Robert Chen stood at the podium, visibly shaken by the events of the past 24 hours. I want to start by saying that the board was not aware of Mrs. Whitmore's plans to take someone's boat without permission. Her actions were not authorized by this board and do not represent the values of our community. The crowd erupted with questions and angry comments. Several residents demanded Patricia's immediate removal from office. Others wanted to know how the board could have been so out of touch with their president's activities. A few residents who knew Jerome personally spoke passionately about the violation of trust and the damage done to the community's reputation. Helen Rodriguez took the microphone next. Effective immediately, Patricia Whitmore has been removed from her position as HOA president. We are also conducting a full review of our policies and procedures to ensure something like this never happens again. Meanwhile, Jerome's attorney in Atlanta was fielding calls from multiple law firms offering to represent him in civil litigation against Patricia and potentially the HOA board. The video evidence was so clear and the circumstances so egregious that several attorneys saw it as a straightforward case with significant damages for emotional distress, violation of property rights, and the public humiliation Jerome had suffered. Mr. Washington, his attorney explained during a phone call, you have a very strong case for civil damages. The security footage alone proves unauthorized entry, theft, and destruction of your peace of mind during an already stressful time with your mother's illness. Jerome was torn between seeking justice and simply wanting to move on with his life. I just want people to understand that this isn't okay, he told his lawyer. You can't just take someone's property because you think your cause is more important than their rights. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Patricia's criminal trial became a local sensation, with the courtroom packed with curious residents and news reporters. The security footage was played repeatedly, showing her using fraudulent claims to gain access to Jerome's boat and then hosting her party as if she owned the vessel. During her testimony, Patricia attempted to justify her actions by emphasizing the importance of the community event and her belief that any reasonable boat owner would have supported the cause. Her defense fell apart when prosecutors pointed out that she had never actually attempted to contact Jerome before taking his boat. Mrs. Whitmore, the prosecutor asked during cross-examination, did you consider that Mr. Washington might be dealing with a family emergency and counting on his boat being safe and secure in his absence? Patricia's answer revealed the depth of her entitlement. I assumed that if someone could afford a boat like that, they would understand community responsibility and be happy to help with important events. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Patricia was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 2 years of probation, and ordered to pay full restitution to Jerome for damages, legal fees, and emotional distress. The civil case that followed was even more devastating for Patricia. Jerome's legal team documented not just the financial costs of the theft, but the emotional impact of watching strangers violate his property while he was caring for his sick mother. The jury awarded Jerome substantial damages, including punitive amounts designed to send a message about respecting other people's property rights. Several of the VIP guests who had participated in the cruise also faced civil lawsuits for their role in the theft, while they claimed ignorance about the boat's unauthorized use. Jerome's attorney argued that reasonable people should have questioned the situation when Patricia couldn't produce proper documentation during the Coast Guard inspection. Councilman Williams, facing potential ethics violations for participating in criminal activity, settled his portion of the lawsuit quickly and quietly. The business leaders who had been considering investments in Riverside Marina withdrew their interest, citing concerns about community leadership and legal liability. The story had lasting impacts beyond the immediate legal consequences. Patricia lost her job, her reputation, and eventually her home when the civil judgments forced her into bankruptcy. She became a cautionary tale about the dangers of HOA overreach and entitled behavior. For Jerome, the financial compensation helped, but the emotional scars took longer to heal. When he finally returned to Riverside Marina after his mother's recovery, he found a community deeply divided about the incident. Some residents were genuinely apologetic and welcomed him back warmly. Others seemed to resent the negative attention the case had brought to their exclusive neighborhood. Ultimately, Jerome decided to sell his boat and move to a different marina community. The violation of trust had made it impossible for him to enjoy his weekends on the water in the same peaceful way. New Horizons had represented freedom and achievement when he bought it, but now it reminded him of how quickly someone else's sense of entitlement could destroy that peace. The case became a landmark precedent for property rights and HOA limitations. Legal scholars cited it in discussions about the proper bounds of community authority and the importance of respecting individual property ownership. Marina communities across the country updated their policies to prevent similar incidents. Years later, when people discussed the case, they often focused on the dramatic elements: the Coast Guard escort, the news coverage, the elegant party that became a criminal investigation. But for Jerome, the heart of the story was simpler and more personal. It was about working hard to achieve a dream, trusting your community to respect that achievement, and learning that some people believe their priorities justify taking whatever they want from others. The New Horizons case, as it became known in legal circles, stood as a reminder that property rights exist for everyone, regardless of their race, income level, or social status within a community. It proved that justice can prevail when victims have the courage to speak up and the evidence to support their claims. Most importantly, it showed that in America, no one has the right to take someone else's property simply because they believe their cause is more worthy or their position more important. Patricia learned this lesson at the cost of her freedom, her reputation, and her financial security. Jerome learned it at the cost of his trust and his peace of mind. But the community learned something valuable too, that leadership means respecting others' rights, not finding creative ways to violate them.